at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hey, welcome along. On tonight's Mark Steyn show, Tony Blair isn't quite done wrecking what's left of Britain. Peter Hitchens will wade into his latest wheeze. Be honest, there's nothing you chicks dig more than finding a be-penised woman in your ladies' room. Well, that's what the Times wants us to believe, but is it actually true? Oh, and in case you think those waiting lists to see an actual doctor aren't long enough, the General Medical Council wants to revoke the licenses of those GPs and physicians impertinent enough to question state policy. So what'll that mean? 7 years waiting for your hip operation? Also war, lest we forget. But forget what exactly? Plus, the most vital part of the show, all the more important when we live in the constant swirl of a blizzard of lies all around. Your comments and questions, do send them along by email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, Twitter me at gbnews. But first, as always, the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. The High Court has ruled that government policies on discharging patients from hospital to care homes at the start of the pandemic were unlawful. The case was brought forward by two women whose fathers died from COVID-19 in 2020. Judges said the regulations failed to take into account the risk to elderly and vulnerable residents from non-symptomatic transmission. The Chancellor has been cleared of breaching the ministerial code over his family's tax affairs. Boris Johnson's standards advisor also ruled that there was no conflict of interest in Rishi Sunak having held a US green card. Mr Sunak referred himself for investigation after it emerged his wife held non-domiciled tax status, exempting her from paying UK tax on overseas earnings. The Chief Whip is investigating claims that a Tory MP has been caught watching porn on his mobile phone in the Commons. It's after several newspapers reported that the allegations were raised during a meeting of Tory MPs. Conservative MP for Mid Derbyshire, Pauline Latham, says the culture within Parliament needs to change.
Whoever it is, and I have no idea, although I had heard the story, they should go. They should go, and that will mean their ministerial career is absolutely shot. Their parliamentary career too, probably, because that is totally and utterly, well, it's just not excusable in any way.
Russian media says the Kremlin is sanctioning 287 British MPs. The Prime Minister says they should regard it as a badge of honour. Meanwhile, Russia is being accused of blackmail after Gazprom halted gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria because both countries are refusing to pay in rubles. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the move will hurt Russia. Councillors in York have voted unanimously to strip Prince Andrew of his Freedom of the City of York honour. It's after the Prince was accused of sexual assault by Virginia Giuffre, allegations which he denies and have been settled outside court. York councillors are also calling for Prince Andrew to be relinquished of his Duke of York royal title, something that Parliament must vote on. Both Buckingham Palace and a spokesperson for the Duke of York have declined to comment. City of York councillor Darryl Smalley told GB News this vote happened to protect the city's reputation.
Proposed the motion to remove the honorary freedom today, just to distance York from Prince Andrew. I think we've had many months now of our city being linked with him as those allegations came out, as the court case rumbled on and the subsequent reaction to it. And we're only acting in a similar way to the Queen. The Queen recognised that he was doing reputational damage to those military patronages and other honours and positions that he held. And so it's only right that as a City Council we act as well.
TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now, let's get back to Mark Steyn.
So we have two kinds of ministers on the front bench. Ones who watch pornography on their telephones in the Commons, and others who pass what the Queen's Bench Division of the High Court called today not only unlawful COVID policies, but irrational. For all of you, follow the science, must follow the science. The High Court has ruled that those policies were irrational. I hope that will be as big as the porn-watching Minister of the Crown, because I'm not sure that hasn't actually been... It's certainly racked up a higher death toll than the porn addict minister. Quick update on what we were talking about last night, the sudden epidemic of hepatitis in children under 5 that the UK Health Security Agency chief thinks may be due to weakened immune systems from the COVID lockdowns, the masks, the isolation of the last 2 years. It's now spread further from America, Western Europe and Israel to Canada and Japan, but over half the cases worldwide are still in the United Kingdom. We'll see where this thing is going. The Right Honourable Sir Tony Blair, KG, PC and Paramount Chief of Mahera in Sierra Leone. Yes, really, Paramount Chief. Aside from his duties in Mahera in Sierra Leone, he was also Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for a decade. But despite his best efforts on multiple fronts, from immigration to the House of Lords, he didn't manage to wreck entirely everything. So he still chips in with suggestions from time to time, like some hit-and-run driver who then decides he wants to reverse over the guy in the road just to make sure. So Sir Anthony's latest is that he wants 70% of children to go to university. And I noticed from the media coverage, everyone, oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? Oh, marvellous, Tony Blair, 70%. I don't think that's enough. I think 130% of British children should go to university. You know, what really matters is what sort of education you get up until year 8, year 9, which is 12, 13. If they screw that up, it doesn't really matter if you stay in school till year 28, year 29. At the time the United States entered the Second World War, the average American had what they call over there a grade 8 education. So that's our year 9. Grade 8 America helped win the Second World War. Grade 8 America emerged as the dominant post-war power and a great innovator in all kinds of areas. Now Americans stay in worthless colleges you've never heard of till 26, 27, 28, and China's snaffled up the world while the US's human capital is taking a lethargic 6 years to complete a bachelor's degree in non-binary and colonialism studies. But it's also the case that keeping everyone in school until early middle age seriously deforms your society in all kinds of other ways, the most important being the postponement of family formation. Britain has deathbed demography because superannuated children get married later and later and have their own children later, if at all. That's why almost all population growth comes from transformative mass immigration in cities up and down the spine of the country. They're the children you didn't bother having because you were too busy doing a module in how the white man is responsible for homophobic gangster rap lyrics. And if you don't leave school till 28, the state has to import gazillions of people to do all the first foot on the ladder jobs. So sending 70% of UK children to university may finally complete the total demolition of functioning society that seems to have been Tony Blair's aim all along. Right now, about 53% go to university. And I say to them, I'll have a decaf macchiato with extra foam and hold the cinnamon. Full disclosure, I didn't go to university. I've set foot in them once every 2 or 3 years to give a speech, but that's pretty much dried up since the woke-talitarian thought police took control. Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at gbnews. Peter Hitchens wrote a corker of a column on this, and he joins us now. Peter, what's the problem with 70% of British youth going to university?
Well, there's far too many. If you want to have universities, they should be for an elite. You have to recognise that some people are equipped for university courses in what are often abstract or very complex subjects, and they need to be very well educated before they get there to take advantage of the courses. And this country, before the middle 60s, had a small number of universities of very high standards, which provided that elite. And it's noticeable now that we're a country pretty much without an elite. You go and watch, if you can bear to, the deliberations of the House of Commons. It's almost impossible for an intelligent person to stand it for more than a couple of minutes. It is the case now in Britain. This is Hitchens' third law of politics. Don't ask me for the first two because I've forgotten them. Is that it is a positive disadvantage to know anything about the subject under discussion. And this is something which has happened in my lifetime, that people who are now in charge of almost everything important by and large, don't know anything at all, but do conform with extraordinary willingness to a set of ideas which has been pretty much indoctrinated into them while they weren't being educated.
Yeah, and actually, to use that word indoctrination, if you look at what they're being taught in British schools, taking that from kindergarten to your master's degree, it would seem to be that the longer you spend in the system, the more deformed your view of your own country, for one thing, becomes.
Well, we can't find out. How do you find out what's actually being taught in schools? It's almost impossible for any ordinary member of the public to penetrate a British state school and find out what's going on there. Inspectors can do it to some extent, but how interested are they in this subject? It's a secret. I get letters from parents whose children have plainly been subjected to what looks to me like political indoctrination at school, but there is no possibility of conducting the research which would discover exactly what it is that they are being taught. What's for certain is that the examinations which they now pass at incredibly high levels are far lower in standards and content than they were 50 years ago. If you confront it, you can buy actually in some shops books of old GCE O-level questions from the 1960s and 1950s. If you confronted modern school children with it, this is no reflection on them because they haven't been taught. They would be completely baffled by the demands made on them. The standards have been watered down, watered down again. The grades inflated. But what has been very successfully done, and this is also backed up, of course, by electronic media of all kinds, is a hugely conformist set of opinions which everybody is expected to hold, and which it takes a considerable amount of guts to fight against, and both by parents and children themselves. So there are people who come through it more or less unscathed, but they're quite rare.
Yeah, and the natural contrarian streak of youth seems to have actually been suppressed by this continuous social engineering from kindergarten on. I don't want to let you go, Peter, without talking about the other subject of your column the other day, which is Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, who has been held at Belmarsh in terrible conditions that have clearly had an impact on his health. And it's in the gift of the Home Secretary on whether now he is going to be deported to America. My view on this is he's one of the Queen's Australian subjects. He owes no allegiance to the government of the United States whatsoever. If the over-bloated deep state in Washington can't keep its own secrets, that's their fault. He shouldn't be being transferred to a filthy, disgusting, awful, corrupt federal justice system in America simply because he's embarrassed the deep state in Washington. And you don't share his politics, but you are offended by this.
Well, I agree with much of what you've just said. I don't. It's not justifiable that he should be extradited. I'm very doubtful about extradition to foreign jurisdictions anyway. I think that many countries refuse to do it altogether, and I'm not sure they're wrong. I think the treaty which this country has with the United States over extradition is, despite various claims that it's okay, is very unequal. I can't imagine for a moment that if if the United States were doing a mirror image of this, if we were trying to get from the United States one of their citizens who we were accusing of breaking our Official Secrets Act, I think we'd be struggling enormously. And of course, we all know from the IRA period how incredibly difficult it was to get IRA people out of the United States. And I just don't think that there is a fair arrangement. But the other thing about it is this is a political case. Senior politicians have actually offered their opinions on Assange's guilt, something which could not happen under British law. If they did that, the whole case would collapse. If a government minister had intervened and said that someone had done something wrong, then the court would have to throw it out because it was hopelessly prejudiced. And it is a political case, and the extradition treaty clearly says there should be no political extraditions. That alone seems to me to be wrong. But also, are you a proper country if another country can just reach into your territory and lift out somebody it wants to punish for, as you rightly say, embarrassing it? I don't think you are. And that's why I very much urge people to write to Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, politely and briefly, and say that this extradition should not go ahead. She has the power to refuse it. Her predecessor, Theresa May, refused the extradition of Gary McKinnon some years ago on comparable grounds. It's quite possible for her to do it, and she should. And if enough people write to her, she may well pay attention. I very much urge people not to say, "Oh, it won't do any good. It's useless." It may not turn out to be useful, but it's certainly going to be a lot more useful than doing nothing.
No, I agree with you on that. I think it's an absolute disgrace. As you say, it wouldn't happen the other way around. If either in London or in Canberra they were going to try and demand it. Well, in fact, they've tried. There's Americans who've run over British subjects, and they get on the next plane and nobody can get them back, even though there's a corpse in the middle of the road. So this is not an equal extradition arrangement that, as you say, raises the question of whether this is still an independent country. Before people forget, it is important, though, to write to the Home Secretary. If you don't know who the Home Secretary is, I don't blame you, but she's the Right Honourable Priti Patel, and her address is the Home Office, 2 Marsham Street, London, Southwest 1. Write to her, 2 Marsham Street, Southwest 1, because it will make a difference. This is a political crime he's committed. He's embarrassed the American deep state, and they want to get him for this, and it means he will likely, because the corrupt Federal Justice Department wins over 97% of its cases without even going to trial, this guy will not be coming out of prison alive if he gets off a plane in Washington. It's a terror. That's another reason. I love America, but I do not love its federal justice system, Peter.
Well, I so agree with that. I mean, I also love America, and I used to think that its justice system was modelled on ours and was admirable. But seen in practice, particularly the system of plea bargaining, where instead of being given a proper trial in front of a jury, someone is told, look, if you go to trial, the chances are you'll go to prison for 150 years. But if you make a bargain with us and plead guilty, then you'll get off in 10. That is a shocking misuse of the system, and it means there is no true presumption of innocence, no true fair trial. And those figures of 97% convictions are the sort of thing you might expect in Vladimir Putin's Russia, not in a free country. And it's just wrong. And I don't think people imagine that the American system is fair. They've all seen To Kill a Mockingbird and moving pleas to the jury in a crowded courtroom. But that's not what happens in most cases. And confronted with that choice between 150 years buried alive in some dungeon and 10 or 15 years, most people will take the 10 or 15. And who can blame them? But it's not justice.
You're quite right. I'll never forget that, being in the Chicago courthouse that my boss, Conrad Black, was in trial on. Yeah. And I used to go into the other court. There were dozens of courtrooms in that building. And his was the only one that had a trial in, because all the other people had settled beforehand. So you could go and have your sandwiches and you make your phone calls in all the empty courtrooms, because only poor old Conrad, a Canadian, was naive enough to think that you went to trial and had a fair trial in the U.S. Justice system. It's appalling. Do keep on with this Julian Assange thing, Peter. And just a reminder, that's Priti Patel at 2 Marsham Street, London, Southwest Bank. Thank you very much, Peter Hitchens. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. What do you reckon, both to Julian Assange and to 70% of British young'uns going to university? GBViews at gbnews.uk. We're coming right back with your thoughts on the passing scene. Plus, we don't just need more university students, we need more transgenders and immigrants and transgender immigrants. But we can afford to get rid of doctors, apparently. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let us get to your comments. Julian, we want to know whether you think there's too much value placed on university degrees. Julian said, yes, ever since Blair wanted more in. Well, you know, he was the guy who set that 50% target sort of around 1998. Took 20 years to achieve it, but it happened. it happened. And so his 70% target will happen, assuming anybody still listens to Tony Blair. Twitter user says, we place too much value on artificial targets for the percentage of the population entering university, while possibly devaluing university degrees. Topics that used to be commonplace at Bachelor of Science or Bachelor of Engineering level being reserved for Master of Science or Master of Engineering level, for example. Well, of course, the one thing that will happen is the more people you demand go to university, if you set a government target or an official target of 70% of the population going to university, then what you learn there will be the equivalent of what you learn in year 9 or year 10 before you massively, or your sixth form, before you massively expanded everything. Obviously, that makes sense. There are very few real, genuine academic disciplines, and a relatively small number of people have the aptitude to go and do them. So what you can see it in America, where towns of 100,000 have 7 so-called universities. It's like Starbucks. If you miss the exit for the first university, there'll be another one along in a couple of 100 yards. And so obviously what's being taught in there is not in any sense an academic discipline that is worth postponing your entry into the adult world for. Roger says, I think there is no price limit on knowledge, but the cost of many of these degrees is too high. Engineering, science, etc. Rowan says, yes, a lot of degrees are worth less than the balloons studying for them. Media studies, gender studies, women's studies, etc. If you're doing something called studies, it's blank studies. It doesn't matter whether it's non-binary studies or the gusset of my trouser studies. If you're doing anything with studies in the title, it's completely worthless. Rowan says, hold classes like that in the community centres. No, hold classes like that in the interval of your Christmas panto, because that's what it is. It's a joke, just like Widow Twankey. Okay, breaking news from America. In Portland, Oregon, under the Menstrual Dignity Act, menstrual products will be installed in all boys' bathrooms starting with the new school year in September, because it's totally unfair that little Jimmy should have to be embarrassed every time it's his time of the month, every time he's being visited by his Aunt Flo, as the American expression has it, or indeed his Uncle Flo, as the case may be. Did you see this story in the Times this month? The whole country supports trans rights. That's what Robert Colville says. Well, I look at that. The whole country supports trans rights. I've got to say, I totally disagree with that. Oh, wait, what the hell am I saying? I'd like to keep what passes for my career and not render myself totally unemployable. So yay trans, the more the merrier. I love a be-penised woman. The other kind seems so passé now. What are my pronouns? You're probably wondering. Well, actually, I've just opened my heating bill and think it might be time to identify as a British thermal unit, at least until the spring evenings warm up a bit. Speaking of energy costs, so we all being gaslit by the UK's ghastly group Think Media, not just on trans rights, but the virtues of mass immigration and all kinds of other subjects. Laura Perrins is one of the founding colossi at the Conservative Woman website, and she thinks so. It's great to see you, Laura. I don't believe this for a moment, this story in the Times, and I certainly don't believe the stuff about immigration, because that is one... objecting to the trans thing is all a bit complicated for some people, and you get clobbered and you pay social consequences if you're not cool with it. But people actually are quite upfront on the immigration thing, and they don't buy into this idea that we're all panting for more mass immigration, do they?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, in the piece I wrote today for the website, there were two headlines that were about, say a week apart, one in the Sunday Times and one in the Times. And I remember when I first saw the transgender headline, it was on a Sunday, I'd been quite relaxed. And I just really had to do a double take. I was just thinking, like, are they actually serious about this? I mean, granted, of course, the columnist never writes the headline, and the piece was quite nuanced. But this idea, I can just see this sort of the pitch for it. Well, let's go with that. The whole country supports transgender rights, and another guy, the whole country, really? Do you think we can go with this? I'm not too sure about that. And then it goes back and forth, right, in the room, and they're like, yeah, just put down the whole country. And then to see this other piece, on immigration. Again, I mean, the first half is perfectly fine. I mean, he laid out the numbers, and essentially saying, if you didn't know it, all the numbers are going up, by the way. The government aren't telling you, but that's what's happening. So he's actually done a service. But again, it's wrapped up with this idea, and a lot of it, both pieces were heavily reliant on polling, by the way, which I've always been highly, highly suspicious of. And essentially they say, look, everybody's on board with this transgender thing. The majority of people super relaxed about the immigration, just so very relaxed. And that, I think, was the exact word he used, which again sort of raised eyebrows. I was like, it's not really a subject that I feel people are relaxed about. And I was just thinking, it's sort of an obsession of mine now, is that are they just lying to your face? Is this a way to manipulate you? What I think happens is the polling companies get together, and without wanting to be sued, they sort of get their polling together, and then this is thrown at you, right? That you now are in the minority. The position that you once held, namely that men are men and women are women, you're now a minority on this. And then this sort of filters down to the columnists, and then they can all push it out. So then you're left reading your Sunday Times, on a Sunday, and suddenly you're told, actually, you're part of the minority. So, you want to get on this transgender train. And this actually pushes people onto the train. And that, I think, is why I use the term gaslighting, right? Because it comes from the film where the husband is saying, look, you're the crazy one, when, of course, he's manipulating her. And these headlines and the pieces, and I believe the polling, are highly, highly manipulative.
Yeah, I think that is certainly true. I mean, I think the reality on the immigration thing, I think the reality is no developed nation needs mass unskilled immigration, because all those jobs in 5-10 years are going to be done by robots or artificial intelligence or whatever. So the economic rationale for immigration, which people like the Wall Street Journal were very keen on, that ship has sailed. It's over. It's gone. People want at heart. The reason that issue is salient in Britain is because if Britain's done for, people would at least like to die in a Britain that's recognisable as Britain, like in the way that the Japanese want to die in a nation that's recognisable as Japan. So this whole thing is designed, I think, to suppress any honest conversation on the subject. To say, as you put it, no, it's over and your side has lost, and we're going to go door to door and shoot the survivors, so you might as well jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it's used as a way to shut down debate. This is the same thing as, you're on the wrong side of history. Well, who says I'm on the wrong side of history? You say it. Who are on the opposite side of the debate to me. I don't think I'm on the wrong side of history. Thanks very much. So again, it's just a rhetoric used to shut down debate. I mean, in terms of the details of the immigration, I mean, I do agree with you. There are a lot of jobs that will go, will be automated. But I do think there's a real issue there in what the columnist did say. And I think he's probably right in that the birth rate is tanking, as you know, which it's a bit, you talk about the fertility rate collapsing a lot. And we do need immigrants to look after our old people and also look after the kids, because so many nursery workers are, they're not, they haven't been born in the UK, and everybody stuffs their kid in nursery. They're not willing to look after their child themselves. So somebody who's willing to do it for low pay has to do it instead. And if you pushed, the general population on this, then I think people do start getting uncomfortable. They're certainly not relaxed, because then you start asking very personal, tough questions as to, well, why don't you want to look after your kids? That can't be done by a robot ever. Or why aren't we looking after Granny? Also, I know in Japan, actually, they might be doing that, which is, unbelievable.
Robots looking after Granny.
You can't get a robot to do that. So it does contain there are some tough questions behind the immigration thing, but the idea that we're all super relaxed about it is clearly a lie.
Thank you very much for that, Laura. It's always good to see you. And you are right that in Japan, the old folks increasingly are looked after by robots. They have apparently very realistic hands that are all soft and pampering and caressing, and not like the hard, calloused hands of actual NHS workers. So that's where the Japanese are on this.
I think they have dolls
thank you very much for that.
They have dolls.
Yeah, they do. They have dolls.
The kids.
Yeah, to be the grandkids you don't have. They have dolls that can hold simple conversations with you, which are actually more sophisticated than your average ASBO lad of an 11-year-old ASBO type could have with you. So they're impressive, the Japanese, on these things. I may get a robot grandkid myself. As you know, I think the third shot on the COVID is a total flop, and I've asked both our Monday statistician, Jamie Jenkins, and our Tuesday doctor, David Steyn, to produce some evidence that the so-called booster has any beneficial effects, because Sajid Javid is already talking about a fourth shot. By the way, Kamala Harris, the American vice president, has had a fourth shot, and she's got the COVID right now. But don't worry, the fifth time, that'll do the trick. If you're a doctor and you're minded to raise a skeptical eyebrow on Twitter, be aware that the UK's General Medical Council is going to get you. This is from The Guardian. Doctors could soon face action over misleading social media posts. So if you query the groupthink that's profoundly damaged a generation of British children these last 2 years, you'll be struck off. Oh, thank you, doctor. I'd like a second opinion. Well, I'm afraid a second opinion is illegal now. There's only one permitted opinion. The General Medical Council has not had a good war since Wuhan unleashed its virological blitzkrieg, and clearly recent medical developments, such as the childhood hepatitis, haven't persuaded them to change their general attitude. Or indeed recent legal developments. As we mentioned at the top of the show, the Queen's Bench Division of the High Court has just ruled this very day that certain government policies promulgated by the Health Secretary and Public Health England in March and April 2020 were, quote, irrational. Nothing much is going to happen on that, because the Health Secretary in question, Matt Hancock, is not in office, and Public Health England has been dissolved. So I don't think one should have to wait 2 years for a legal judgment to be able to raise an eyebrow. You should be able to say something while they're doing it to us. Dr. Anthony Hinton is with us. Thank you for joining us. Are you concerned about this threat by your regulatory body?
Well, the GMC has always had this power to look at anything doctors publish on social media, on interviews like this. And I've had a certain amount of trouble myself, which I can go into in a minute. I'm pleased to say that after almost 40 years as a doctor, I've never had a complaint against me to the GMC. But when we look at misinformation, there's lots of things that we need to think very carefully about. Who decides what is misinformation? What was labelled misinformation a year ago is now the accepted truth. So if we look, for instance, just at my own vaccination record, I've not taken a third dose of this vaccine. I just do not think it's necessary. I only took the first 2 doses of the vaccine, because the government and my medical bosses were telling me that it was important for me to protect my patients, and I would be one of the 15 million jabs to freedom, and then the vaccinations would stop and all the lockdowns would lift and be no more. Both of those things turned out to be misinformation from the government and their medical advisors. And it's not so much the misinformation that is the problem. The problem is the censorship of doctors like me that take a different view. We're more than happy to discuss and debate these things with Chris Whitty or whoever wants to come up and talk with us, but we were censored and we were pilloried. The people that brought out the Great Barrington Declaration, which said, protect the people at risk and let everyone else go about their normal business and keep the economy going and don't have lockdowns. Let's look at lockdowns. We were told that lockdowns were essential to save lives. Well, Sweden gives the lie to that. Sweden had no lockdowns, and yet they have the lowest excess death rates of the whole of Europe. So luckily we have Sweden as something that we can look at and we can compare. Science and medicine moves forward by different views and arguments on the science. There isn't the fixed science. If doctors didn't disagree over time, we would still have no new treatments. We would still be treating people with leeches like we did in the Middle Ages. You have to have different views and you have to be able to discuss them. So I don't have any particular... Sorry?
No, that's true, Tony. No, that's true, Tony, except I think under the current health arrangements in Britain, even if we went back to leeches, there'd be like a 2-year waiting list to get a leech. So we have complicated things since the Middle Ages. My view on this is, even if you try to be as calm, so we're not talking about myocarditis in young men. We're not going to talk about the hepatitis in children under 5. Let's all just stay calm. And it is actually very hard to see supporting evidence for putting these jabs in your arm every 3 months moving. He's talking about a 4th jab, Sajid Javid. He's already talking about another one coming up in the autumn. There's no evidence that this does anything for either the person getting the jab or for the general population.
No, it's quite ridiculous. My dad, who is 89, has taken his booster shot. He's had 3 jabs. He is due for a 4th. He's not taking a 4th. He's not medical in any way. And he said to me quite sensibly, if 3 jabs haven't worked, why is a 4th jab going to work? And in fact, I know you were discussing this just a few nights ago, the fact that looking at ONS figures, it appeared that people that had 3 jabs had a higher rate of catching COVID than people that were unvaccinated. Now, we can argue about why that might be. Could be, for instance, that the people that are unvaccinated have a higher proportion of people that already know they've had COVID, so they have reasonable immunity from having caught COVID, and that's why they don't have the jab, so that skews the figures. We really don't know, but that's what the ONS figures showed, and I've been suspended from Twitter on 3 occasions for tweeting basically government website figures. Now, hopefully things on Twitter are going to change. Now it's under new management. But on Twitter, I have to sort of self-censor, really. There are things that just aren't discussed, like early treatment. Talking about that court case today. Now, that court case came from panic after modelling done by the infamous Professor Ferguson, who every single one of his models is wrong. usually by a factor of 10. That panicked the government and they wanted to empty out the hospitals. And so what they did is about 20,000 people they moved into care homes without any testing. Now, talking about Sweden, Sweden made that exact same mistake. But the difference is Sweden admits that was a mistake and says they would never make that same mistake again. Matt Hancock pretends that was never a mistake. He says they put a ring of steel around those care homes and protected them, which everybody knows is completely untrue. It's more misinformation. And unless doctors and scientists with a different view can openly discuss that, the misinformation is allowed to continue.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that, because that, in fact, was what these judges at the Queen's Bench Division found today. That policy was irrational, unjustifiable and unlawful. And so if whatever we were saying about it 2 years ago, you'd be losing your Twitter account, you'd lose your Facebook account, but now a judge has ruled on it 2 years later, and God knows how many dead. As you're right. The Swedes apologised for that decision, and basically every other government in the Western world needs to apologise for similar, which is why I'm calling for a royal commission. Thank you very much, Tony. We appreciate you joining us. I don't want it to happen again. The Chinese are not going to let this rest. They're all, whatever they're working on in Wuhan is going to be out of that institute and around the world at some point, and we don't want to make all these mistakes over again. Some of the signs coming up, GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me, ad hominem attacks, always welcome. And from down under, the one and only Alexandra Marshall, straight ahead.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hey, Vladimir Putin today responded to that NATO Plus meeting in Germany by threatening to nuke everyone. Yeah, if anyone decides to meddle in ongoing events, they must know our response will be lightning quick. We have all the instruments for this, ones nobody else can boast of, and we will use them if we have to. That's good to get a heads up on. Still, there's roughly 200 nations and territories out there, so it may be a while before he gets to Wales. Oh, wait, we have breaking news. Russian state TV has expanded on President Putin's remarks. Presenter Vladimir Solovyov has said that Moscow's 16,000-mile-per-hour Satan II nukes could annihilate, quote, boorish Britain in a single strike. I doubt many UK residents worry about war, but then 6 weeks ago, neither did they in Mariupol, a town which is now rubble. In the northern half of the Commonwealth, we remember our war dead on a grey November morning, and it's always very moving to be on a pinprick British island such as Grand Turk or Bermuda and see everyone wearing their poppies. If you're under the Southern Cross, autumnal April is the bigger day for the poppies. Anzac Day was on Monday, and we salute all those brave soldiers of the Antipodes, even though there are none left from the Great War and fewer every year from the Second. But does war and its remembrance have any purchase on the young? Alexandra Marshall joins us from The Spectator Down Under. You wrote a very interesting piece on this, Alexandra, suggesting that we've fundamentally learned the wrong lessons from Lest We Forget and Never Again and all the rest of it. And that in Anzac Day in particular, I mean, as I understand it, in Australia you have the solemn ceremonies in the morning, and then it's a big party all afternoon long for the young. What do you think their understanding of war is these days?
Well, look, it was a good idea to start with. The idea of having the somber remembrance in the morning and then the parties all afternoon, it certainly has stuck with our young. Like, the Anzac Day is one of our most successful remembrance services. So it was a good idea to do that. The problem is, what we've been teaching young people is that war is terrible, we should avoid war, but we didn't teach them how to avoid war. So the message of what went wrong in the last two world wars, the things that fell apart and the politics that failed that led to the terrible loss of life, has not been taught to young people. So that's mostly a failing of our school systems. We're failing to teach history pretty much at all. So my concern is that although we remember what happened, and although we know that it was awful, we've not given this generation the skills to avoid it happening again. And we are seeing the world make exactly the same mistakes. We've almost got a situation now where they're repeating both the First and the Second World War mistakes, geopolitically speaking. So yeah, I worry that we've not done our duty as far as educating the young.
Well, there's a very basic error, which I think is when people hear phrases like "lest we forget" or "never again," that they think it means never again nationalism, that somehow assertive nation states lead to war, and that therefore if we all come together in things like the European Union, or we all get together to talk about climate change, that's preferable to nationalism. And so that seems to me to be a basic misunderstanding of the situation.
Well, not only that, they've forgotten that organisations like the United Nations and the League of Nations before it actually tend to make things like world wars worse, because they delay small conflicts arising and being resolved, and they take all those little conflicts until they erupt into a huge global war. So the United Nations is actually unhelpful in this situation. So as far as whether it's a dictator or fascism or nationalism, every country that's ever existed has been nationalistic. Nationalism does not create conflict. What creates conflict is a leader who bets his leadership on acquiring more territory and usurping nations around him in order to show how prestigious he is and ensure his power. We have leaders around the world like that right now, like Xi Jinping and Putin, who have used their military prowess and promises of conquest to politically ensure their survival. And that is why we are seeing war break out now. They're making impossible demands on their neighbours. They say to Taiwan, well, we're going to come and invade you, and if you don't reunite, we're going to invade. Well, that's not a reasonable demand, and a demand like that leads to conflict. And so we have not taught the world how to divert these kind of situations from happening in the first place.
Well, we live in a situation where some of the wealthiest societies that have ever existed in human history could not credibly defend their borders, while at the same time you have basket case states like North Korea going nuclear. Iran wants to go nuclear and has said it's going to share it with Sudan. So what Sudan used to do with machetes, they'll be able to do with nukes. That everyone thinks this weird situation where Norway couldn't really defend its borders, but North Korea can nuke Norway. Everyone thinks that situation can somehow hold permanently without any bad consequences.
Well, what we did is built a giant chest of treasure and then said, please, please don't come and take it, which doesn't really work when people next door want it. But we had a pretty good setup after the Second World War, where the US was pretty much a policeman of dictator states. With the US was not an expansionist empire. So the US was not a conqueror. It didn't want to go out and take over its neighbors. It's very unusual to get a superpower who isn't interested in direct conquest. You can hold peace with somebody like that who sits there like a teacher in class separating the children. But if you get someone like Xi Jinping in charge who does want to conquer Asia, and someone like Putin who does want to conquer Europe, or a madman like our little North Korean friend who doesn't really mind what happens, you can't have a stable world without a moderator who has some kind of restraint.
We'll look back fondly on the American moment because China and Russia behave much more like conventional imperial powers, as you've just pointed out, Alexandra. These are going to be a very busy and lively few years, and a lot of smaller nations have some tough calculations about whose side they're going to take. It was a very interesting piece, and I'm glad that Anzac Day... Anzac Day is a marvellous thing, and I hope people still understand the real meaning of it. Thank you very much, Alexandra. It's always good to see you. Let's do a bit of last-minute stumping. Brian says, why is NATO basically doing its best to keep this conflict going with monthly meetings on Ukraine? What are the USA and the West, as well as Russia, trying to achieve from this? I think after Afghanistan, the US is trying to reverse its record. It's trying to win a war without actually having to do the fighting itself, because that went disastrously in Afghanistan. What was the first piece in the COVID house of cards falling? The truckers' convoy, the backbench rebellion at Christmas, the NHS staff standing up to the mandate, maybe. All these things played a part. There's a general weariness and a recognition that the last 2 years has been a crock, like whatever season it was of Dallas, where Bobby Ewing stepped into the shower and whoever it was, Victoria Principal, realised that the last 2 seasons had been a bad dream. Our last 2 seasons have been a bad dream. Candy says, why do you consider China's expansion into the Solomon Islands a gross provocation to the West, but the West's expansion into the Ukraine not a gross provocation to Russia? No, I've said as much. I don't want those buffoon senators like Lindsey Graham. I don't want Hunter Biden running around Ukraine on the... Basically, Washington used Ukraine as a money laundering operation, and Putin got mad with it. It's absolutely disgraceful. That'll do it for me. The one and only Dan Wootton is here to wallop your Wednesday as only he can. This is my favourite show on TV. It's such a great one. Stick around for Dan. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. Dry and bright again for most tomorrow. It will be a bit of a chilly start once more, with temperatures tonight under clear skies again getting down close to and a touch below freezing in some places. High pressure continues to bring the dry, fine weather, but the winds coming around the high pressure just feeding in more cloud again across eastern areas, so that cloud thickening up somewhat overnight. That increasing cloud will help to stop temperatures falling too far, but for parts of northern England, southern Scotland, North Wales, we are going to see a frost, certainly in rural areas. Temperatures in towns and cities generally holding up a little bit above freezing, but even through the central belt of Scotland, we could see frost even in urban areas here. So a chilly start to Thursday, but generally another sunny start. Quite a lot of cloud across these eastern parts of England once more, and the small chance of the odd shower across Lincolnshire and Norfolk. And through the day, the risk of 1 or 2 showers across the far north of Scotland. But for most it's dry and bright, some good spells of sunshine for South Wales, southern England, 16, 17, say in Southampton, 14 in Belfast. Much cooler again in the east, particularly where it stays cloudy through parts of Yorkshire and East Anglia. We'll see that cloud perhaps breaking up a little bit more during the afternoon into the evening. Still a few showers through the night across northern Scotland, but for most it'll be clear again, and again a hint of frost on Friday morning. Again, it's a similar day, dry and bright with plenty of sunny spells across the west, always more cloud across parts of eastern England. Maybe one or two more scattered showers on Friday over eastern and southeastern parts of Scotland. But for most it's dry, and you get the sunshine. It feels pretty pleasant with temperatures in the mid-teens where it stays cloudy, and on some eastern coasts. Again, it's going to be chilly with temperatures struggling. But the high pressure that's moved in is sticking around, certainly for the start of the weekend. So for many, it's another fine and bright day on Saturday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and